From the very first time I encountered Natalie, I had this overwhelming sense that she was the person I had been unknowingly searching for all my life. She possessed a quiet kind of grace, one that didn't demand attention yet naturally drew it in. Her brilliance, ambition, and magnetic charm seemed to align perfectly with my own, making our connection feel almost uncanny, like we were crafted from the same mold. Natalie worked as a financial consultant in a fast-paced environment, while I held a leadership role in the luxury hospitality sector. Our mutual drive to succeed and our understanding of the pressures that came with high-powered careers brought us even closer. We both knew the reality of long hours, constant travel, and the relentless demands of our jobs. Or so I believed. The beginning of our marriage felt like everything I had ever hoped for. Even with our hectic schedules, Natalie always made room for the small moments that truly mattered, savoring coffee together on the patio every Sunday morning, surprising me with impromptu dinner dates, and slipping thoughtful notes into my suitcase before I headed off on business trips. Those gestures, though simple, felt profound. They made me feel like I had won some cosmic jackpot. I did what I could to match her efforts. I organized getaways, prepared meals when time allowed, and made it a point to be present whenever she needed to talk about a frustrating day or a difficult client. We operated as a unit, or at least, I thought we did. Reflecting now, I can recall the exact instance when I began to see her through an idealized lens. It was during a corporate gala where she accompanied me as my date. I watched her move effortlessly through the crowd, engaging and charming everyone she met. My coworkers leaned in to whisper how fortunate I was, and I agreed, swelling with pride. Natalie wasn't just my wife. She was my partner in every sense, my equal and the person I imagined spending forever with. But life has its own way of delivering reality checks when you least expect them. The small fractures in our picture-perfect marriage didn't show up suddenly. They emerged gradually, so quietly that I hardly noticed. That might be how betrayal works. It creeps in silently, hiding in plain sight until it's impossible to ignore. At that stage, I was still completely consumed by my admiration for her. I didn't notice the warning signs because, in my eyes, there weren't any. Natalie was flawless, or at least, that's the version of her I chose to believe in. Pinpointing the exact turning point is difficult, but change was inevitable. It started in subtle ways. At first, I convinced myself it was nothing. She began staying late at work more often than usual. Given the demands of her profession, that wasn't particularly strange, but her approach shifted. Previously, she would let me know if she was running late. She'd call, send a message, or at least express regret for missing dinner. Gradually, those calls became infrequent. When she did eventually return home, she seemed emotionally distant. Initially, I brushed it off, thinking it was just stress from her workload. I understood how draining high-pressure jobs could be. I told myself not to overanalyze things. After all, even the strongest couples face ups and downs. But then came the text message. It happened on a Friday evening while we were relaxing on the couch, watching one of those true crime documentaries she adored. Her phone buzzed. I didn't think much of it, until I noticed the urgency in her movements. She reached for the phone immediately, her expression tense. It wasn't the relaxed glance of someone checking an unimportant notification. She seemed nervous, even a little alarmed. She let out a shaky laugh, muted the phone, and placed it face down on the table. I asked casually, trying to keep my voice light, "Who was that?" Her eyes stayed on the television as she replied, "Just a client. He's been a bit overbearing lately." Her explanation sounded reasonable, but her demeanor told a different story. Her shoulders were stiff, and she held the phone with a firmness that betrayed her anxiety. It was a brief interaction, yet it planted a seed of unease in my mind that I couldn't shake. Later that night, lying beside her in bed, my thoughts spiraled. I wanted desperately to believe her. I needed to trust her. But that moment of doubt had taken hold, and no matter how I tried to dismiss it, it lingered. Over the next several weeks, I began to observe patterns. Her extended work hours became more common, and they frequently lined up with ignored calls or texts she brushed off as work-related emergencies. The connection that once made our relationship feel so alive was fading. Her laughter no longer came easily, and she stopped showing interest in my daily experiences. I began to feel like I was sharing my life with someone who had become a stranger. I kept telling myself not to jump to conclusions. Maybe she was just overwhelmed by responsibilities. Perhaps she needed some breathing room. But deep down, I couldn't ignore the truth anymore. My instincts were louder than ever, and for the first time since we married, I questioned whether she was being genuine with me. It's odd how the erosion of trust reveals itself through the smallest details. The way her smile didn't quite light up her face anymore. The way she subtly pulled away from my touch or avoided eye contact when we spoke. The home we once filled with warmth, shared moments, and laughter now felt cold and strangely silent, even when we were both present. I tried to push the thought aside, refusing to believe it could be real. I couldn't accept the idea that Natalie, the woman I had committed my life to, the one I loved deeply, might be keeping something from me. But the signs were there, growing more obvious with each passing day. As much as I wanted to turn a blind eye, I knew I couldn't go on pretending everything was fine. Something was off, and I had to face it. It all came to a head one Friday evening. Natalie had left for what she said was another late-night appointment with a client. I sat alone in the living room, the soft murmur of the television providing background noise, but I wasn't absorbing any of it. The restlessness that had been simmering for weeks finally reached its peak. I needed answers. I couldn't ignore my instincts any longer. On the dining table sat her laptop, wide open and unguarded, a rare occurrence for Natalie, who was usually very careful about her privacy. That night, she must have been in a rush. My hands hovered above the keyboard for a moment, weighed down by guilt. I didn't want to violate her trust, but a louder voice inside reminded me that the time for doubt had passed. I needed to uncover the truth. I accessed her email, and at first, it seemed harmless, typical work messages, professional and ordinary. But then I noticed a conversation that stood out. The subject line read, "Dinner plans tonight," and it was from someone named Lucas. As soon as I saw his name, my stomach turned. I clicked into the thread, my heart pounding as I read. These weren't work-related. The messages were deeply personal and disturbingly intimate. Each sentence cut into me. It wasn't just a flirtation. They were clearly involved in something much deeper. What made it even worse was the realization that I had met Lucas before. He wasn't a stranger. He was married too and had once shaken my hand with a smile at one of Natalie's work events. I remembered thinking he seemed polite. Now I saw him for who he truly was, a man entangled in the same deception that was unraveling my life. The emails painted a vivid picture of their secret affair. There were mentions of elegant restaurants, weekend escapes, and discreet meetings at boutique hotels. And it wasn't just about the physical moments. Their words revealed an emotional closeness that cut even deeper. They shared a world hidden from their spouses, one where their responsibilities didn't exist. The betrayal wasn't casual. It was calculated, deliberate, and cruel. A wave of nausea hit me. The room felt smaller, like it was caving in. My immediate reaction was to confront Natalie right away, to call her and demand the truth. But another thought quickly surfaced. If she had worked so hard to keep this hidden, she would only dodge the truth again. No, confronting her without solid evidence would be a mistake. I needed more than her words. I needed proof that left no room for lies. That night, I stayed up going through every bit of data I could find on her laptop. The deeper I dug, the clearer the reality became. And although each new discovery hurt, it also sparked something inside me, a sense of resolve. I was done being blindsided. I wasn't going to let her twist the story or escape responsibility. She had made her choices, and now she had to face them. The truth was undeniable. Natalie, the person I believed I understood better than anyone, had been leading a separate life right under my nose. But what hit even harder was the realization that I wasn't the only one being deceived. Lucas had a wife too, Camille. She, like me, had been kept in the dark. Suddenly, it wasn't just about my story anymore. There were more lives entangled in this web of betrayal. All the pieces were now in front of me. What remained was figuring out how to use them. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I stayed up in the still darkness of our home, my mind consumed with thoughts of what to do next. Natalie believed she had outsmarted me, that her secrets were safe. But she was wrong. This wasn't just about exposing the truth. It was about taking back the strength and dignity she thought she had stripped away from me. By the time the sun rose, my grief had cooled into something sharper, determination. The betrayal cut deep, but I wasn't going to let Natalie or Lucas escape without consequences. They had broken their promises willingly and treated their marriages like burdens. Now, it was time for them to confront the reality they had created. I took the first step by reaching out to a private investigator. If I was going to confront Natalie properly, I needed more than just words on a screen. I required hard evidence, proof that couldn't be explained away. The investigator came highly recommended, a seasoned expert who had dealt with cases even more complicated than mine. Over the following weeks, he gathered everything I needed: photos, surveillance footage, and detailed reports with exact dates and times. There was no more room for denial. Natalie and Lucas weren't just stepping out for work-related dinners. They were visiting hotels, sharing moments of closeness in public, walking hand in hand as if they had no commitments elsewhere. Every piece of evidence hurt, each one a new wound, but at the same time, the truth brought clarity. There was no room left for doubt. Natalie hadn't simply made a mistake. She had shattered the foundation of our marriage with deliberate actions and utter disregard. As I examined the pile of evidence again, a different realization struck me. Camille, Lucas's wife, wasn't just an outsider to the chaos. She was a casualty, just like me. She had been oblivious to what was happening right under her roof. The irony wasn't lost on me. Lucas had been bold and shameless in chasing after my wife, yet he had no clue that his own secret world was on the brink of collapse. I struggled with the thought of contacting Camille. Would it be cruel to involve her? Was it even my responsibility to reveal the truth? But the more I reflected, the more I believed she had a right to know. No one deserves to remain in ignorance, especially when truth can lead to freedom. Eventually, I sent an anonymous package to Camille. Inside, I included every bit of proof I had managed to gather: photographs of Lucas and Natalie together, receipts from hotels, and printed copies of their email conversations. I added a note as well: "You have the right to know what's going on. If you'd like to talk, here's a number where you can reach me." I wasn't sure whether she would respond, or if she'd even believe the contents of the envelope, but I hoped she'd recognize the truth staring back at her. Several days later, my phone rang. The voice on the other end was composed, yet carried a deep undertone of pain. She introduced herself. "This is Camille. I received your package." We agreed to meet that same evening in a quiet cafe tucked away from the crowds. Camille walked in calm and collected, but her eyes betrayed the storm inside her. As we laid out all the evidence between us, an unexpected connection formed. We were both hurting, both deceived, but what stood out to me most was her resilience. Camille wasn't the kind of person to crumble under pressure. She wanted resolution, justice, even as much as I did. "I want to confront him," she said, voice steady and eyes unwavering. "But I want to do it in a way he'll never forget." Her resolve sparked something in me. I suggested, "What if we face them together? They think they've pulled this off. Let's prove them wrong." For the first time that night, she allowed herself a small smile. I like that idea. And with that, a powerful, unexpected partnership took shape. In the weeks that followed, Camille and I worked closely, constructing the perfect plan. This wasn't just about exposing them. It was about ensuring they fully faced the consequences of what they had done. Every detail mattered. We coordinated where and when it would happen, crafting a scenario so tight that Natalie and Lucas would have nowhere to run. We were no longer passive participants in this painful story. We had taken the reins. The entire experience felt almost surreal, as though I had stepped into someone else's shoes. Camille and I worked like strategists preparing for battle: frequent phone calls, discreet meetings, and the continuous exchange of any information we uncovered about Lucas and Natalie's routines. It was no longer driven by anger. This was about reclaiming control, asserting power in a situation we never asked to be dragged into. Camille's strength amazed me. Despite the personal blow she had taken, she stayed clear-headed, laser-focused on what needed to be done. She didn't let emotion blur her thinking. She was all precision and intent. Early on, we decided this wouldn't just be about catching them in a lie. We wanted a fallout that would leave a lasting impact, something neither Lucas nor Natalie would recover from easily. "They think they're untouchable," Camille remarked during one of our planning sessions. "But they've overlooked one crucial thing: us." I nodded, feeling a rare sense of unity with this woman who, only a short time ago, had been a complete stranger. "They've been playing with our lives. Let's remind them there are rules they didn't bother to follow." Our confrontation site was a sleek, upscale restaurant downtown, a place Lucas and Natalie often visited for their hidden meetings. It was the perfect spot, just public enough to expose them, yet intimate enough to make the impact personal. Camille even managed to secure a corner table where we'd have a clear view of them without being noticed ourselves. Every step had been calculated to perfection. Meanwhile, I was preparing for my own face-off with Natalie back at home. I wasn't just waiting to catch her. It was important that she returned to see the life she had so easily discarded in ruins. I had already prepared divorce papers and arranged for her to collect her belongings. This home we had built together? It was no longer hers. Camille had her own plans in motion. She wasn't only confronting Lucas as his wife, she was ready to challenge him on a professional front, too. Using her own contacts, she dug up evidence showing that Lucas had misused company finances to fuel his affair. "Let's see how the board reacts when their star executive turns out to be living a lie," she said, her tone cold and determined. The night before our planned confrontation, I sat alone, thinking over everything that had brought us to this point. The love I had once felt for Natalie now felt distant, like it belonged to someone else, buried beneath months of deception and heartbreak. And yet, part of me still wrestled with unanswered questions. Had I done something wrong? Or perhaps failed to do something important? I didn't have those answers. Maybe I never would. But what I knew for certain was this. This was no longer about patching up a broken relationship. It had become a matter of restoring my self-respect. Camille and I spoke one last time before everything would unfold. "Are you ready for this?" she asked. I answered with as much certainty as I could manage, as ready as I'll ever be. "And you?" There was a brief pause before she replied, "It's not going to be easy, but it needs to be done." In that moment, I realized how much inner strength it required for both of us to confront this situation head-on. We had been blindsided and publicly embarrassed, yet we didn't let that defeat us. We had taken the hurt and used it as fuel, turning our sorrow into determination and our grief into purposeful action. By tomorrow, Natalie and Lucas would realize that the people they thought they could deceive so easily were far more resilient than they imagined. As I ended the call, an unexpected calm washed over me. The storm was just on the horizon, and I was ready to meet it without hesitation. The evening of our confrontation was charged with a nervous energy, almost electric in its intensity. Camille and I arrived early at the restaurant and chose a quiet table in the corner, perfectly positioned to see the entrance. My nerves were showing. I could feel a faint tremble in my hands as I lifted my glass. Camille, always the composed one, met my gaze and offered a calm nod. "Stay focused," she whispered. "This is about taking back control." Every minute dragged until, finally, they walked in. Natalie and Lucas appeared cheerful, hands intertwined, laughing in a way that stung like salt on a wound. Natalie looked effortlessly radiant, completely unbothered. It was almost impossible to connect this carefree woman with the one I had once shared vows with. The bitterness bubbling inside me reminded me exactly why we were doing this. Camille and I sat silently, watching as the two of them immersed themselves in their romantic illusion. They ordered wine, exchanged affectionate smiles, and leaned into one another like they were in a fairy tale. It was nauseating and oddly empowering. They had no idea their perfect scene was about to unravel. Once their main courses were served, Camille subtly signaled me. We stood together, crossing the room slowly and with purpose. The usual background noise of clinking silverware and hushed conversations seemed to vanish as people began to pay attention. By the time we reached their table, Natalie's expression froze in a mix of shock and disbelief. Lucas, caught mid-sip, nearly choked on his wine at the sight of us. "Natalie," I began, my voice colder than I'd ever heard it come out of my own mouth, "you forgot to mention you'd be sharing dinner with Lucas tonight." Her face turned pale instantly. "Jacob, I can explain," she began. I didn't give her the chance. Reaching into my bag, I placed a folder firmly on the table. "These are the divorce documents. You have 10 minutes to sign them, collect your things, and leave my house." Her eyes widened, struggling to comprehend what was happening. "Divorce?" she echoed, stunned, as though the very idea was foreign to her. "You're being unreasonable." "Unreasonable?" I shot back, unable to contain my frustration. "What's truly unreasonable is you throwing away everything we had for this." I gestured toward Lucas, who looked like he wished he could disappear into the floor. Camille wasn't about to stay silent. She turned her icy gaze to Lucas and said, "And you, Lucas? Keeping secrets again? Did you think I wouldn't find out eventually?" He made an attempt to stand, but Camille pressed a firm hand onto his shoulder, forcing him back into his seat. Her tone remained calm, but there was steel in it. "You're not leaving. We have unfinished business." She reached into her own bag and placed another folder on the table, right next to mine. "Your company's board will be receiving this on Monday," she announced. "Let's see how they respond when they discover their chief financial officer has been misusing company funds to entertain his mistress." Lucas's complexion turned ghostly. "You wouldn't do that," he mumbled, clearly shaken. I absolutely would, Camille said with a frosty smile. And I will. By now, the restaurant was silent, the surrounding patrons fully engrossed in what felt like an unfolding drama straight out of a television series. Natalie and Lucas sat frozen, completely outmatched, while Camille and I stood firm. The control had completely shifted to us, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I could breathe freely. I leaned in slightly toward Natalie. Did you really think I wouldn't notice? The lies, the late nights, the betrayal? You misjudged me. That's your mistake. Without another word, Camille and I turned and walked away, leaving them in stunned silence. As we stepped out into the night, I felt a mixture of emotions swirling inside me: relief, lingering anger, and a faint sense of closure. Though the confrontation was over, the real aftermath was only just beginning. Natalie returned home later that night, clearly shaken and unkempt. This time, she didn't even bother trying to hide the truth. Instead, she begged, sobbed, and pleaded for forgiveness, but I remained unmoved. My voice was firm and cold as I told her, I gave you a choice, and you made it. Now you have to deal with the outcome. Once more, I handed her the divorce documents, this time leaving no space for discussion. Sign these, pack up your belongings, and go. You're no longer welcome here. There was a time when her tears might have stirred something in me, but those days were long gone. The woman standing before me was a stranger, a far cry from the person I had once loved and trusted with my heart. The betrayal had altered everything. Even if her remorse was real, it couldn't undo the choices she had made or the pain they caused. By the next morning, I had already changed the locks. I packed all her things and arranged for them to be delivered to her parents' house. She called and texted constantly, flooding my phone with apologies and explanations, but I didn't answer any of them. At one point, she even came to my workplace, but security promptly escorted her out. Each attempt she made to fix things only reinforced my decision. There was no going back. I wouldn't allow myself to be pulled back into a place where trust had been shattered so completely. Meanwhile, Lucas faced the consequences of his own actions. True to her promise, Camille handed over the damning evidence we had collected to his company's board of directors. It didn't take long. Within just a few days, Lucas was fired. Misappropriation of funds, the scandal of the affair, it was more than enough to bring about his downfall. The news swept through their business and social circles like wildfire, and the humiliation he faced was swift and unforgiving. Camille gave me a call the day after he was let go. Her voice was steady, almost quiet, as she said, "It's over. He's out." There was no trace of gloating, just the calm satisfaction of seeing justice served. But Camille wasn't done. She filed for divorce soon after, cutting Lucas off from the life of comfort and status he had always taken for granted. Without his high-paying job and the support of his former social connections, his life began to unravel. Through mutual acquaintances, I learned he had moved into a cramped, run-down apartment, a far cry from the luxurious home he had once shared with Camille. Natalie wasn't faring much better. She had clearly misjudged just how much she would lose in the divorce. My attorney, who handled the case with the level of intensity one needed, ensured that her settlement was far less than what she had expected. Though she tried to contest it, the evidence was simply too overwhelming to overcome. Her reputation took a significant hit as well. Friends she once leaned on began to distance themselves, not wanting to be associated with the scandal. Still, there was no sense of triumph in any of this. I never saw it as revenge. It was about holding people accountable, making sure they couldn't just walk away from the damage they caused. Natalie and Lucas had made their decisions, and now they had to deal with the fallout. That was justice, and it was enough for me. What left the deepest impression on me was the unexpected strength Camille and I found in one another. We kept in contact, offering mutual support as we each dealt with the aftermath of our broken marriages. There wasn't any romance between us, just an unspoken understanding. A connection forged by shared experiences and mutual respect. Slowly, we started to rebuild. Each of us took one step at a time toward a new life. Betrayal might have torn our worlds apart at the start, but ultimately, it made us more resilient. That resilience, that quiet strength, was the true victory in the end. In the days and weeks following everything that had happened, reality felt distorted, almost dreamlike. The house, once filled with tension, now felt open and quiet without Natalie. It was as if a weight had been lifted, when I hadn't fully realized I was carrying. Breathing came easier, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of freedom. But finding peace wasn't immediate. Reminders of our life together lingered all around me. Her calls and messages didn't stop right away either. Each day brought something new. Sometimes she pleaded, other times she accused, and occasionally, her desperation came through. Initially, I read them out of a kind of morbid curiosity, not because I was considering a response. The messages ran the gamut of emotions, regret, blame, denial, but they all seemed centered around her own loss. None of them felt like they were meant for me. Eventually, I understood. Her sorrow wasn't about what she did to me. It was about what she had given up, her comfort, her security, the stability she had thrown away for fleeting excitement. I stopped reading her messages altogether and deleted each one without a reply. By then, my lawyer had already notified hers that from that point forward, all communication would go through legal channels. There was nothing left to say. No apology, no explanation could ever repair what had been broken. The divorce moved along quickly, largely thanks to the undeniable evidence I had on my side. Within a few months, it was finalized. Natalie left with far less than she had imagined, but it was her pride that took the harshest blow. Lucas's collapse was even more public. Camille had ensured that every bit of information was properly documented and delivered. His termination became a hot topic in his professional field, and his name was tarnished beyond repair. The social groups that had once embraced him and Natalie turned cold. Gossip and judgment replaced admiration. Word got back to me that Natalie had tried reaching out to Lucas after both of their lives had imploded. But Lucas, overwhelmed by his own problems and trying to rebuild from nothing, wanted no part of reconnecting with her. During that period, Camille and I would occasionally check in with each other. We weren't traditional friends, but we shared something that didn't need to be explained. It was a quiet, unspoken connection that only those who had endured what we had could truly understand. We had walked through fire together and emerged on the other side, not without scars, but certainly tougher than before. Camille once confided that facing Lucas had been the most difficult challenge of her life, yet it had also given her an incredible sense of empowerment. I could wholeheartedly relate. Taking back control of our lives, which had once been derailed by deception, brought a sense of freedom that words could barely capture. Meanwhile, Natalie and Lucas continued down a path of unraveling. Lucas, who had once basked in luxury and power, now lived in a simple, unimpressive apartment, worlds away from the lavish lifestyle he used to show off. Natalie's world was shrinking fast. As the story of her betrayal made its rounds, her reputation began to crumble. Professional contacts stopped calling, and friends gradually turned away. She had burned more bridges than she realized, only understanding the cost when it was too late. As for me, picking up the pieces after betrayal was no small feat. Healing didn't happen overnight. There were days weighed down by anger, sorrow, and doubt. But there were also moments of understanding, times when I recognized that the Natalie I had once cherished no longer existed. She had become someone entirely different from the woman I had fallen in love with. Holding on to that fading version of her was painful, but letting it go was the only way forward. I found comfort in the stillness of my home, a place that finally felt like mine again. I began enjoying the little things, reading books I had long neglected, listening to music that brought peace, and taking long, reflective walks. Slowly, I reassembled my identity, realizing that I was not defined by what Natalie had done. My worth extended beyond the damage she left behind. Camille and I had made sure of one undeniable truth: Natalie and Lucas would carry the weight of their decisions for a long time. Still, the real triumph wasn't in witnessing their downfall. It was in our own resilience and growth. Recovering from such betrayal wasn't a single moment of triumph, it was a continuous journey. Every day brought a new choice, another opportunity to step toward becoming the person I aspired to be. For several weeks, it felt like I was relearning how to exist in a world that no longer had Natalie in it. The house, once filled with her presence, had fallen quiet. And although the silence felt heavy at times, it was also a welcome relief. It gave me the room I needed to reflect and start anew. The first milestone was reclaiming the space around me. I began redecorating, swapping out furniture and art pieces that reminded me too much of our shared past. Each change, though seemingly small, was meaningful. It felt like retrieving fragments of myself that had been lost in the chaos. I donated many of our mutual possessions and stored away others I wasn't quite ready to let go of. The home that once stood as a symbol of our marriage gradually evolved into something completely my own. Work became my refuge. Dedicating myself to my job brought back a sense of direction and drive. Tasks that once felt like obligations now offered welcome structure. My coworkers noticed the change, often commenting on how energized I seemed. They didn't know the details, and that was intentional. I wasn't searching for sympathy. I just needed to prove to myself that I could rise above it all. Camille and I continued to stay connected, checking in with one another as we each worked through the final stages of our divorces. Our conversations were simple and supportive, sharing progress, offering advice, or exchanging kind words during tough moments. Her strength amazed me. Despite all that Lucas had done, she faced every obstacle with a quiet determination. Her divorce was finalized not long after mine, and though we didn't talk much about it, I sensed she felt the same bittersweet closure that I did. One evening, Camille called unexpectedly. "How are you holding up?" she asked with genuine concern. "I'm doing better," I replied honestly, taking it one day at a time. "I'm glad to hear that," she said, her voice calm but firm. "You deserve far more than what they put us through. Don't ever forget it." Her words lingered with me long after our call ended. They reminded me that Natalie and Lucas's actions, as painful as they had been, didn't define who we were. Our identity was rooted in more than the hurt we had endured. Moving forward meant accepting that truth and living by it. Naturally, doubts still crept in from time to time. During late nights when everything was quiet and my mind wandered, I found myself questioning the past. Could I have acted differently? Were there warning signs I ignored? But gradually, those questions faded in importance. The answers no longer carried weight. What truly mattered was that I had come through it, and I had come out stronger. Rebuilding a social life presented its own set of challenges. After the divorce, many friends we once shared drifted away, unsure of how to handle the situation. I couldn't fault them. Betrayal complicates loyalties in ways few people are prepared for. Still, I didn't let that isolate me. I focused on meeting new people, those unfamiliar with Natalie, untouched by the history we shared.